Hey, it's Emma from Green Schools. We're here at Sandy Lake Park. We're going to talk to Karen from the Ecology Action Centre and learn all about this beautiful park and what they're doing here. Let's go!
Hi, so I'm Karen McKendry. I work on wilderness topics at Ecology Action Centre, and I thought we'd go on a little tour of Sandy Lake Regional Park.
Can't wait!
Yeah, so we're in an old growth forest stand in Sandy Lake Park, which is amazing because there's so few old growth forests left in Nova Scotia, but this one's right in the city. So some of the ways we know that it's an old growth forest are it has huge old mother trees. Some of them are more than 125 or 140 years old, which is pretty rare in Nova Scotia. And one thing they do is provide lots of shade in the forest, so it's nice and cool here in the summer. But it's also hard for other trees to grow up because it's so shady. So some of these young trees, which are going to be the big trees of the future, are 40 or 50 years old. They're very slowly growing up. And when a big tree falls down and creates a shaft of sunlight, they'll become the new big trees of the future.
That's awesome. These trees are only 40 to 50 years old. They're not very big.
Yeah, they're really hindered by that shadiness. They can't reach their full potential. But part of the natural cycle of an old growth forest is one day a big tree limb like this one or a big tree will fall down, and that'll make space for the next generation. And that kind of cycle has been happening in Nova Scotia for thousands of years.
All right, so what would you normally be telling students when we come to this area of the park?
Yeah, this part of the park's really neat to show a part of biodiversity, the number of species in the world that we don't always talk about. So sometimes when we think of species, we think of like deer or mice or butterflies or fish, but there's a whole bunch of species that rely on dead things. So if you look behind me, there's all these dead trees here, and sometimes people think, well, dead is bad, it means the forest isn't doing well, but it's actually doing really well. On those dead trees, there's often more species living on dead trees than there are live trees. So the dead trees and the things that break them down are kind of like the garbage collectors of our world. They're super important, but they're really underappreciated. And so we have lots of great dead trees and logs at Sandy Lake Park where we are now, and that contributes to the great biodiversity here.
Wow, what a really cool ecosystem for all of those bugs.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so what are we looking at here, Karen?
This is a little temporary pond, which is exactly what's needed for things like salamanders and frogs. They, in the springtime, have to lay their eggs in the water, but not just any water. They want to make sure to pick a little pond that has no stream flowing in and no stream flowing out, because then it won't have any fish who could eat their eggs. So one great thing about this park is it has all these little ponds, and if you come here in the springtime, you see fish eggs, salamander eggs, which I love because that's partly why I got into this line of work. When I was young, my favorite animal was frogs, and I wanted to be a herpetologist, which is someone who studies reptiles and amphibians. And I wanted to do that for years. I studied some of that at school, and eventually I changed more into conservation. How do we have areas where wildlife comes first and gets protected? But my first love was frogs, and so I still check for frogs' eggs here every spring.
That's awesome. I love that. We're here at Sandy Lake, the lake that we've been talking about. And do you want to connect it to how Ecology Action Centre helps or what they do here?
Yeah, so Sandy Lake Regional Park, here's Sandy Lake. True to its name, it's a sandy lake. And so the park covers one side of the lake. It's got 1,000 acres of forest and wetlands, so it's a huge park, and it's protected forever for wildlife and for people to enjoy. And the lake is connected to the health of the forest. So if we keep the forests healthy and clean and don't cut them down, then the lake will still stay fantastic for fish and for swimming. Unfortunately, what's proposed on the other side of the lake is a big suburban sprawl housing development. So not the kind of housing that we need in Halifax. That'll involve a lot of pavement. There'll be a lot of polluted water that could flow down into the lake. So part of my work at Ecology Action Centre is teaching people the biology of like what would happen if that went ahead and what are some other solutions instead. A solution could be extend the park and have more park in the heart of Halifax. That would be great for everyone, and instead put housing where it's a better fit. And so I bring people here on guided walks. I meet with politicians, elected officials, all kinds of people who will decide the fate of this area and try to show them the science and the values of like why have a bigger park instead of possibly damaging the park and the lake.
That's awesome. So what are we looking at here?
Yeah, so here's some red spruce. It's a type of spruce tree in Nova Scotia. It's really common. And one thing that's really neat about it, you know what would be great today is if we had a warm cup of tea. And
Okay.
so we could make a tea out of these spruce tips. Yeah, you can harvest some of them and put them in hot water for a bit, and then it'll make this nice tea that tastes good and is also really high in vitamin C, the same kind of vitamin C you get from orange juice. So it can be really healthy, especially in a forest where there's not a lot of citrus trees. This is a key way that Mi'kmaq, people of Nova Scotia, and others can get their vitamin C.
That's awesome. So Karen, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, your education, how you got working with the Ecology Action Centre?
Yeah, I guess you can really trace that back to as a kid, I loved nature. I loved swimming. I loved playing in the woods. I loved catching frogs. I loved drawing nature. So when it came time to go to university, one thing I really wanted to study was ecology, which is the science of like all the relationships between things, how nature works. I was fascinated by that. So I did that at the University of Guelph, and every summer I tried to get a job working outside because I love being outside. So while I was there, and then after that, I got all these cool jobs studying different things. I had a job studying butterflies on Vancouver Island, so I caught butterflies all day. I got a contract, another job working on Arctic invertebrates from the bottom of the Arctic Ocean. So these were all really neat, but they were just like for a few months at a time, and they were always something new, which I really liked. But I also wanted to have like a more steady job, in part where I would get to contribute to nature conservation, like making sure some areas are protected. So I went back to school and did my master's degree at Dalhousie University in environmental science. And yeah, then got more jobs that were like longer term, and I had more power to protect nature. And then the opportunity came to work here at EAC, Ecology Action Centre, where my job is more around being an environmental activist. So trying to convince decision makers what areas to protect and why, to make sure that our laws really do protect nature, and to help people find ways to fight for the places that they want to protect.
So what exactly is the Ecology Action Centre and what do you do here?
So on the one hand, Ecology Action Centre is an environmental charity. It's an organization. It's one of the oldest in Nova Scotia. It has more than 4,000 members. So there are people all over Nova Scotia who say, hey, I support this. And Ecology Action Centre has always been really grassroots. So we work on environmental issues that come up in Nova Scotia and in the world in 7 different action areas. So we work on things like the marine environment and also wetlands and also forests, but also like food and how our government works and things like that. And so we both respond to things that come up, like if government or a company makes a really bad decision about the environment, we're going to respond to that. But we also do really proactive things and try to make new things in the world that are great for the environment.
How would young students or older students get involved volunteering or helping out with the Ecology Action Centre?
Yeah, so we have a volunteer list. So we need all kinds of volunteers, from people to paint posters when we're going to have a rally, to people to write to government, to people to look at documents, to people to come out and help host events. So we have a volunteer list that anybody can get on to hear about the volunteer opportunities all the time.
Responsibilities here. What do you do in your day-to-day work?
The job of an activist at Ecology Action Centre. So Ecology Action Centre is an environmental charity. So we work on all kinds of environmental issues. My expertise, the area I work in, is on wilderness. So how do we keep our biodiversity protected? How do we have spaces that are for people and nature? And how do our laws and rules of the past and coming up work towards a more biodiverse future? So I do things like attend meetings and fill out spreadsheets and read documents, which is important that somebody do that. And I'm getting better and better at that. And that's a big way to make change in the world is connect with and work in those systems that already exist. And sometimes we have to protest the systems that aren't working and be critical of what needs to change about them. And a part of my job is connecting people with nature, because people will act for things that they know firsthand, that they've had like an emotional connection to. Then they'll go back to their decision makers or their spreadsheets and ask for the change that they want. So we do still need to be like come back to connecting with place. And so part of my job is connecting people with amazing places.
That's awesome. How do you connect those people with those places?
Yeah, so in Halifax, our city is amazing, but we need to keep some of it wild for all of the benefits. It keeps us alive, and other species get to live here too. So there are 3 key places in Halifax that if we could keep them wild, we can have a great city. Wildlife can live there too. It'll be able to clear our air and water. Each of those 3 areas is a little bit protected, but needs a little more protection to stay wild forever. And so I lead guided hikes in these places. Sometimes the hiking trails aren't marked. You have to know where to go, but fortunately I do. So I lead people along the trails. I point out the rare species. I talk about the ecology, how it all works together. And then at the end, I give people the opportunity to take action. So if you've learned about this forest or this wetland, you feel it's important to keep it wild, here's the politician you need to talk to. Here's the big decision coming up by government on this date. If you go there and speak your mind, that'll help make the right decision. So it's both connecting people to place and then connecting people on how to protect that place.
Awesome, so important. So what kind of advice would you have for students, young or maybe in high school, that are interested in going into some jobs or some education in ecology or conservation?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I was very fortunate and I was very passionate about nature. So a lot of things I found were really intriguing. So I'd say follow your passion. I would also say I felt like a lot of pressure in school when you're deciding to go to university that's going to set up your whole life. But I didn't really find it was like that. I guess I feel like my work path, my career path is like stepping stones across a river and they don't go in a straight line. So sometimes I had to do something else for a while. So I've also had jobs as like a secretary and in a pet store and at an aerospace company that weren't like nature-y, but they were like a bridge or a stepping stone to my next job that I felt really passionately about. So don't feel like one thing determines your whole future. It's actually a wiggly line. Yeah, and sometimes you have to do something a little outside your comfort zone. So a couple times I moved to a different part of Canada where I didn't know anybody and I didn't know the thing I was going to be working on, but I took a leap of faith. And once I was there, I met amazing people and I learned a lot about the thing that I needed to know about. So sometimes you got to take those leaps.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Karen, for showing us all of the really cool stuff in the Ecology Action Center and all of the things that you're doing, and showing us the forest of Sandy Lake and telling us all of the important things happening in Sandy Lake Park.